So you heard in there, Princess Kate not giving specificity about the kind of cancer, but she says, I am taking preventative chemotherapy. Now, we just had an oncologist, a cancer doctor on, who suggested that that is a meaningful piece of information. Preventative would be suggestive that while there may have been complications, the surgery may have not been what was expected, or the testing afterwards, that preventative would be suggestive that the surgery was largely successful in as much as that would be defined as removing the primary source of the cancer. So that would be somewhat good news, and maybe explain her general state of wellness. Although you must say the royals are known, especially this particular family, for being tough under pressure. And the princess was very cool, given the circumstances that she's dealing with. And that is a credit to her character. But she's also got those young kids looking at her. Now, this comes after Prince Charles announced last month that he, too, had been diagnosed with an undisclosed form of cancer. So how does the family handle this? Are they like us? So far, I'm hearing no. His brother Harry is like putting out a press release and not flying home. So who becomes the face of the royals? Who does all the things that need to be done? How much do they share or change? All right, let's talk. We have Victoria Arbiter and Rob Shooter with us, okay? And we also are going to bring in Princess Diana's former butler, Paul Burrell. Paul, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being with us. Victoria, I just wanted to pick up on something. I say I'm surprised about Harry. You suggest that it may not be improper for him to stay away. How?
I think at this point, Chris, you know, Harry flew to London to see his father, and I commend him for doing so. He wanted to see his dad in person. But the relationship between a father and a son is very different to brothers that are at odds. And I think at this point in time, I think Harry would be criticised if he flew to London. People would say he was making it all about himself. He was trying to shift the focus onto himself. He's in a situation where he would be damned either way. But I think this is also attention that Prince William doesn't need right now. He has spent the better part of 10 to 15 years building that ring of steel, a protective ring of steel around his family. He's done an incredible job of separating his public duty from his private life. And I think he's going to be keen to keep the focus on protecting that young family. We have to look at him and Chris and remember he has lost both grandparents in a relatively short space of time. His brother left in quite an acrimonious fashion. His father has cancer. Now his wife has cancer. All the while, he's also trying to maintain the role which he is expected to fulfill, that of the future king, one that has an important role within the royal family. And he's also looking after 3 young children. He is stretched so thin. So I think we have to remember that there are very human people at the centre of this story. It's easy to assume that royals don't feel anything. They're just kind of these cartoon celebrity characters that are devoid of feeling. Not so. And so I think right now, the best that Harry and Meghan can do is keep their contact with the royal family private and get on with their own lives, allowing the royal family to get on with theirs.
Does raise an interesting question for, you know, those who watch the royals and, of course, the people in the UK of what will the presence of the royal family be as they go through this. And it's an interesting tactical decision about how much you let people in on this. It could be a really, really powerful lesson for the entire society. And, of course, we don't want to neglect, and what these guys have had to deal with, the tragic loss of their mother. That the whole world was part of, for William, a signature part of his upbringing. Paul Burrell, you have been nodding along for a lot of what Victoria is saying. Help me understanding these boys and then men, because that doesn't make sense to me. No matter how ugly anything was between me and my brother, if there was any, God forbid, in his life, there's no question about what I would do and where I would be, and vice versa with my entire family. How is it different here?
Victoria's quite right. Victoria knows about the inner circle. She knows that this is a fracture which cannot be mended. It really can't, because you see, Harry and William grew up with Diana. They both knew the rules of the game. Harry knew the rules. He knew what he should do, and more importantly, what he shouldn't do. But when the split came and he went to America, he'd forgotten what he was taught as a young child, and he made up his own rules. And so now it's okay to push the family under the bus. it's okay to criticize Kate and William, his father, his late grandmother, and all that came out in the book Spare. And the royal family closed ranks, pulled up the drawbridge, and Harry was out in the cold.
All
and
right.
you see, this happens in families when you betray the trust of the ones that bring you up, and you have a very privileged
No, I get
life. And
I
now
get it.
William has drawn a line in the sand.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.